18 Intriguing facts you might not know about Ferdinand Marcos. 1. He was baptized into the Aglapayan Church. Born on September 11, 1917 in Sarat, Ilocos Norte, Ferdinand Marcos was baptized into the Aglapayan or Philippine Independent Church. The church was founded in 1902 by Isabelo de los Reyes and a Roman Catholic priest named Gregorio Aglipay, who also became its first supreme bishop. Members of this church reject the spiritual authority of the Pope as well as the doctrine of the Trinity. They also denied the existence of angels, devils, miracles and other supernatural manifestations. 2. Ferdinand Marcos rare yearbook photo. Ferdinand Marcos was educated in Manila, earning his high school diploma at age 15 in 1933 at the UP High School. His classmates included the class president, Sotero Laurel, future ambassador to Japan, Roberto S. Benedicto, future crony and president of Philippine National Bank, and Colonel Napoleon D. Valeriano, famed anti-Huck fighter. Called Ferdy by his classmates, he is remembered for having a simple demeanor, interested in debates and discussions in which he outshone all. 3. He was a memory whiz, but the claim that he got the highest score ever in the bar exam is false. Marcos was so smart he single-handedly topped the 1939 bar examinations with near-perfect score despite being in jail for 27 days. Or so the viral photo above claims. However, as confirmed by the Philippine Supreme Court, the distinction of having the highest bar exam score in the country belongs to former Associate Justice Florence Regalado, who scored an average of 96.7% in the 1,954 bars exam. Marcos, on the other hand, indeed topped the bar exam in his time but with a relatively lower average score of 92.35%. Although the photo above is nothing but fake news, we can't deny that Marcos was one smart man. Several people attested to Marcos' incredible memory, including the late Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago, who once served as Marcos' speechwriter. One time, the Secretary of Justice forgot to tell me that the president had requested him to draft a speech, said Miriam during an interview with the Philippine Star. And then, on the day the president was to deliver the speech, he suddenly remembered because Malacañang was asking for the speech, so he said, "This is an emergency. You just have to produce something." 4. Ferdinand Marcos changed religion in order to marry Imelda in a Catholic church. When Marcos first met Imelda Romualdez in 1954, it was love at first sight. So after only 2 weeks of courtship, the couple tied the knot first in a civil ceremony in Baguio City, followed by a church wedding at the Pro Cathedral of San Miguel in Manila. When Marcos first met Imelda Romualdez in 1954, it was love at first sight. So after only 2 weeks of courtship, the couple tied the knot first in a civil ceremony in Baguio City, followed by a church wedding at the Pro Cathedral of San Miguel in Manila. 5. His achievements as a president can fill a book, and so can his crimes. President Ferdinand Marcos' dream of building a new society had brought forth several projects that have benefited us in the long run. During his third SONA in 1968, Marcos claimed that the country became self-sufficient in rice and corn, therefore solving the chronic food shortage. Fast forward to 1980 and the Marcos administration reached yet another milestone. The country's gross national product (GNP) dramatically climbed from 39.5 billion pesos in 1965 to an outstanding 86.7 billion pesos in 1979, which translates to 6.6% growth rate a year. And this was only the tip of the iceberg. From September 21, 1972, up to February 26, 1986, Marcos was able to craft and formulate a total of 883 presidential decrees and other 5 legal issuances. All of the country's specialty hospitals were also built during his term, and these include the Kidney Center, Philippine Children's Center, Philippine Heart Center and the Lung Center of the Philippines. Marcos' accomplishments are too many to mention and have since become the benchmark by which the performances of his successors are based upon. But we also have to deal with the other side of the coin. According to the Akbayan Party List Group, the Marcos administration was responsible for 35,000 torture cases, 70,000 incarcerations, and 257 murders. He's also blamed for the arrest of more than 50,000 people, including the desaparecidos, or those who were victims of enforced disappearances. It should also be noted that the value of the peso also dropped from P1 equals 1 United States dollar to P25 equals 1 United States dollar during Marcos' term. And from just $360 million in 1962, our country's debt reached a staggering P28.3 billion by the time Marcos left his office in 1986. 6. President Ferdinand Marcos reportedly used Thrilla in Manila as distraction. In 1975, there was a brewing revolution in the Philippines as a result of President Ferdinand Marcos' martial law declaration 3 years earlier. Rampant corruption, widespread poverty, and impending threats of the insurgency were taking its toll on Marcos' new society. People would continue to lose trust in his dictatorship unless he finds a diversionary tactic. The distraction came in the form of entertainment, world-class entertainment. It was during this era when Manila hosted the 23rd Miss Universe pageant and invited world-famous celebrities such as Brooke Shields and George Hamilton. Marcos also campaigned to have the third and final Ali Frazier match to be held in Manila, a request that was subsequently granted in exchange for a hefty price. The Filipino dictator promised to pay the expenses and even give Ali a staggering $4.5 million pesos at a time when most Filipinos' annual salary was not even enough to pay an upper box seat at the Araneta Coliseum. 7. He reportedly wanted Ninoy to be his successor. In a special report published by the Philippine Daily Inquirer, it was revealed that Marcos considered Ninoy Aquino as the best prepared to be president among the politicians during that era. Some also believe that Marcos may have already considered Aquino as a potential successor even before he allowed the Tarlac politician to have an open-heart surgery in the United States on May 8, 1980. Ex-Master Sergeant Pablo Martinez, one of those convicted of murder, confessed that Ninoy was indeed chosen by Marcos to be his successor. The president's decision reportedly irked some of his allies, and so plans to assassinate Ninoy were made afterward. The same report also discusses an alleged covenant between Marcos and Ninoy. A travel companion of Aquino in the U.S. said that the covenant included the position of Prime Minister in the National Assembly, provided that Aquino won a seat in the 1984 elections. 8. Martial law was communism's biggest recruiter for Marcos. The August 1971 Plaza Miranda bombing, which the regime blamed on the communists, was a clear sign of using democracy to destroy democracy itself. To eliminate communist threats, he suspended the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus and later declared martial law. Ironically, the martial law became communism's biggest recruiter. From the 1,028 armed regulars in 1972, members of the New People's Army (NPA) had ballooned to 22,500 by 1986. 9. U.S. President Nixon and Marcos' martial law. Did Richard Nixon, contrary to the White House's official stand, actually know and consent to Ferdinand Marcos' declaration of martial law? According to Raymond Bonner's book Waltzing with a Dictator, The Marcoses and the Making of American Policy, Nixon had in fact known about Marcos' plan several days before the actual declaration because the latter had personally phoned him twice to inform him about his decision. The U.S. president reportedly answered that he was all right to a dictatorship by Marcos so long as it would help further American interests in the region. Aside from the personal calls, Nixon was also informed of Marcos' plan by the American ambassador to the Philippines Henry Byrod. According to the book, the ambassador told Marcos that the United States was prepared to back his regime if it would be necessary for quelling the communist insurgency. 10. His war exploits are questionable. Marcos claimed he was the hero of the Battle of Besong Pass during World War II, earning a total of 33 medals and awards throughout his career. However, his critics believe otherwise. Bonifacio Gallego, a military officer who resisted martial law, exposed that 11 of the 33 medals were given 20 years after the war when Marcos was already a Senate president gearing up for a presidential campaign. 8 of these awards, on the other hand, were actually campaign ribbons given to all participants in the defense of Bataan and in the resistance. Regarding his war exploits, the U.S. Army found no official documents that could prove Marcos led Ang Maharlika, a guerrilla force composed of 8,200 men. In the end, they declared Marcos' claims to be fraudulent and absurd. So where was Ferdinand Marcos during the Japanese occupation? He said he was freed by the Japanese on August 4, 1942. However, a Japanese document discovered by John Sharkey of the Washington Post suggests that the prisoners released at that time were either too sick or whose families have cooperated with the Japanese military authorities. Marcos was not on the list of ailing prisoners published by the Manila Tribune. We should also remember that his father, Mariano Marcos, was one of those who welcomed the Japanese with open arms and later executed by anti-Japanese guerrillas in 1945. Marcos also claimed that he was hiding at the Philippine General Hospital from June to August 1943. During the same period, President Laurel, leader of the Japanese puppet state, was also staying in the Japanese-controlled hospital. Go figure. 11. The Omega-12 was behind Ferdinand Marcos' martial law. The martial law was not a one-man endeavor. In fact, Marcos sought the help of his 12 apostles, later known as the Rolex 12, named after the Rolex watches that Marcos gave to them as gifts. But according to a 1974 confidential memo of then U.S. Ambassador to Manila William Sullivan, Marcos gave the 12 military officers gold Omega watches, not Rolexes. Hence, the proper term would have been Omega-12. Before declaring the martial law in 1972, Marcos consulted with the Omega-12, and their plans were contained in a confidential document called Oplan Sagittarius. 5 members of the group allegedly helped create the Decrees of Proclamation 1081 before all 12 of them finalized Marcos' plan. The following are the official members of the Omega-12. Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile, Philippine Constabulary Chief Maj. General Fidel V. Ramos, National Intelligence Security Authority Chief Maj. General Fabian Veer, Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Danding Cojuangco Jr. Army Chief Maj. General Rafael Zagala, Constabulary Vice Chief Brig General Tomas Diaz, Armed Forces Chief of Staff General Romeo Espino, Air Force Chief Maj. General Jose Rancudo, Navy Chief Rear Admiral Hilario Ruiz, ISAFP Chief Brigadier General Ignacio Paz, Metrocom Chief Brig General Alfredo Montoya, and Rizal Province Constabulary Head Colonel Romeo Gatan. 12. Marcos and the Yamashita Treasure. First off, General Tomoyuki Yamashita really had nothing to do with the infamous treasure. It was Emperor Hirohito's brother, Prince Chichibu, who led the Golden Lily campaign and plundered Asian territories. Chichibu's cousin, Prince Tsuyoshi Takeda, was then assigned to hide the loot at hundreds of secret vaults within the Philippines. He also gave a copy of the maps to his Filipino servant for safekeeping. Now let's go back to President Marcos. For some reason, he was able to get a copy of the treasure maps and soon ordered his military officers to undertake a treasure hunt. And then came Rogelio Roxas, a Filipino treasure hunter who uncovered in a Baguio City tunnel thousands of gold bars and an 8-inch tall gold Buddha filled with real diamonds and precious stones. It didn't take long before the news reached President Marcos. He immediately sent his men to confiscate the treasure and had Roxas arrested and tortured. When Cory Aquino became the president, she formed the now abolished Presidential Commission on Good Government (PCGG) to initiate the hunt for the missing Marcos loot. As we all know, PCGG only recovered $5 billion in the form of cash and other assets out of the alleged $100 billion loot. Imelda Marcos, on the other hand, claimed that her husband deposited a very large sum in a bank in Brussels, Belgium. This is because the amount of the fortune was so large, it would be embarrassing. 13. He bought the Kaalaman Island in Spratlys for 1 peso. Philippines' claim over the Spratlys started when Tomas Cloma landed at its biggest island in 1956. A seafaring adventurer and owner of a fishing business, Cloma made a proclamation to the whole world that a new state called the Free Territory of Freedomland was created. He asserted sovereignty over the area although no country formally recognized his claims. Cloma, who was also the founder of the Philippine Maritime Institute, was later jailed during the martial law era for the fraudulent use of the Admiral title. His drinking buddies at the National Press Club called him Admiral. He was released after he surrendered all his claims to the islands to Marcos for only 1 peso. Afterward, Marcos officially transformed the biggest island, Pag-asa Island, into a fortification, the first and probably the last time our country was able to add a new territory. 14. He launched the first Philippine-made rocket. Yes, you heard that right, a rocket made in the Philippines. Launched in Caballo Island, near Corregidor, the rocket was part of Project Santa Barbara, which was participated by a group of scientists and the Philippine Navy. Since December 1972, a series of 37 dynamic tests had been conducted on the 180M rocket. The project, initiated by President Marcos, also involved testing of other weapons and armaments. On September 1975, 4 Bongbong rockets, obviously named after Marcos' son, were successfully launched. Asked about why the country was experimenting in making its own ballistic missiles, President Marcos explained, "The defense of the Philippines cannot be left to alliance with other countries. We must assume that there will be contingencies where even the United States may not be ready to come to our assistance." 15. Ferdinand Marcos knew that the U.S. secretly stored nuclear weapons in the country, but never told anyone. This is according to a document released by the National Security Archive based in George Washington University. The said top-secret memo was from U.S. career diplomat Robert McClintock. He informed then Acting Secretary of the U.S. State Department that the storage of nuclear weapons would be covered by executive privilege and not divulged to the Symington Subcommittee on Overseas Commitments. The memo also suggests that the nuclear weapons have been stored in the country for many years, without prior consultation with the Philippine government. The document added, the fact that President Marcos was secretly informed of the presence of these weapons in 1966 would not work to his advantage in the elections. The Philippine government and public are not aware of storage nor of President Marcos' knowledge thereof.